Welcome to the Bestiary, where every episode we examine another monster from the Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. Join us at Alignment May Vary on Twitch, or listen to our podcast, which comes out a week later, on alignmentmayvary.com. Ask and get your questions answered on our Facebook page, or by sending us an email to alignmentmayvary@gmail.com. Enjoy the show.
Check here. I believe we're good. Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the Bestiary. My name is Morganite, and I am here with my friends. Let me mute them one by one because they were being sassy. So, Jonathan is our DM. Say hello, Jonathan.
Hello.
Yep, sassy. Like I said, Stalker. Hello, Stalker. Say hi to the wonderful people.
Hello.
And Kayvon.
Howdy.
Awesome. So today we are here to discuss the Flumph. Who do we have to blame for this wonderful discussion?
It's me.
It's me, a stalker.
Oh boy.
It's gonna be a very good episode, guys. They've
been texting me for the last hour going on about how great this episode's gonna be. So let's see if it lives up to the hype.
We are really excited for the Flump.
Oh, come on. How could you not love floating fart bags?
Yeah, you were so excited to talk about this. Please explain why. What is it about the Flumps that you love?
Well, can we first start just can we describe the Flump? Because I don't think people know.
What is
describe his love. He's the guest. Let him
go for it. But well, tell me just tell us what the Flump is. Like what it looks like. Give us a description.
The Flump is like a jellyfish with eyes on stalks, I would say almost anime-esque mouth and face. And it floats around and farts, and it's kind of cute. And it's such a contradiction to everything else in D&D. D&D, where even the most adorable thing or beautiful thing is still vicious. The Flumph is like this teddy bear of a creature. It's amazing.
A teddy bear of tentacles. I think he forgot to mention it has eye stalks and tentacles.
It's definitely not a teddy bear. It's not fuzzy, and it's definitely weird looking.
Should we see how well he did? Should I show a picture of the Flump and we'll all see?
Because I said like a jellyfish, right? But
it's a jellyfish with eye stalk tentacles. So snail eyes, essentially.
Yeah, snail eyes is a good way to describe it.
Look at that thing.
It is cute.
What even is that?
Wait, okay, is that actually a mouth or just
That is a mouth, yeah.
It's a mouth. Okay, so
it's a mouth in the sense that it doesn't actually, that's not where it eats food. It doesn't have the purpose of a mouth.
Does it eat food like an actual jellyfish does by pulling them up by the tentacles?
More like that. Yes. Not exactly, but yes.
Does it eat food?
I feel like that changes over time, doesn't it?
It does a little bit in that it starts off with spikes on its underbelly in the early editions.
Let's not jump ahead of ourselves, fellas. Let's talk about what it is, what it looks like, where you find it, and then we'll get into the more esoteric how it's shifted over time, maybe.
I do have one. I just have to ask everybody, just staring at this thing. What is the theme song for the Flump?
I don't know. Is there
Star Wars, the Cantina? I feel like that's a good background music for this.
That's good. That's good. I kind of think it's that version, but weird and discordant, something
maybe with some farts.
Yeah.
Good job, guys.
So it's called the Flump for a reason. It's called the Flump because that's the noise, the sound it makes as it expels air as it moves around, right?
Yeah, I mean,
what's the word? What's the name for that? When
farting.
A word is
farting.
based on the sound it makes.
Onomatopoeia.
Onomatopoeia.
Yeah.
Poetry terms.
It basically does it farts to move around. I mean, it literally, that's its movement is farting.
Well, it's expelling air
out of an orifice.
Out of an orifice. It's not necessarily air that's being built up by bacteria necessarily. The air itself doesn't necessarily smell that it's expelling out.
Well, no, it would be like a squid propulsion using the water. I mean, it's no different than that.
Are we getting into the philosophical question of when is a fart not a fart?
Yeah, no. When is expelled air from an orifice a fart, and when is it just
when it's used
air?
For propulsion? It is not a fart.
Yeah.
There are plenty of underwater creatures that use it that way.
Is there any waste?
So you're.
Is there any waste in that fart?
No.
No, I don't. I don't think they specify.
No, there's no.
So, because I mean, if there is, then
wait,
maybe.
Wait.
Yeah.
But are you saying every time you fart, there's waste? Are you saying is this?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
There's small particles of waste, which is part of the reason why it is
smelly.
Not like you just burping out of your butt.
Did you not know this?
My undies are very clean. I'm just gonna say.
No inevitability of justice. Expelling gas underwater is a fart if you are human. I'm specifically referring to creatures.
Wait, so only humans can fart?
No.
Cows fart.
No.
I'm specifically referring to underwater creatures that use water for propulsion, like squids and jellyfish. They suck water in and then blow it back out. That's propulsion.
I feel like your exclusionary tactics here make you a fartist. You are, Morgan.
I do work with colorectal surgeons. I would know this.
Like it does.
So wait. Morgan is a fart expert. She just
it's
said
a fart. It's fartist. Fartist is actually the term.
Fartologist. Fartologist.
Yeah, she's a fartologist.
I actually like that term. Let's keep that one. That's adorable. All right, so moving on from is it or is it not a fart? What else can we talk about them as far as their looks go? And like, what are they made of? Are they like scaled creatures? Are they more like actual jelly kind of stuff?
Yeah, what do they feel like?
Yeah, they're jelly. They have a hard top shell, like not super hard, but a firm top shell, and then a soft underbelly where the tentacles are sort of coming out of, and sort of a jellied center.
The top is actually pretty hard, based on the difference in AC that you get. They actually describe this in early editions. The AC went from its underbelly is an AC 0. Now this is getting into, I'm going to get a little esoteric here, a little fartist here. We in old D&D, AC gets better the lower you go. So I misspoke. The underbelly is an AC 8.
Yeah, it was an AC 0.
AC 0 is the top shell, which means that, well, okay, it's really complicated. You have to get into THACO, which is to hit AC 0, you must roll this minus this. I honestly don't know how Dungeons and Dragons survived its early ages. I really don't know. But
lots of tables.
But the basics are this. The difference is 8. You have to roll 8 higher on your die to hit to damage a flumph when you're hitting its top. Then you have to roll underneath it on a die.
It's pretty big. What's a full plate armor? Is only a dexterity plus like 7 or 8, right? Like
I can't speak to the early days of D&D. I have not memorized the equipment tables from D&D 1 and 2. I know that in modern Dungeons and Dragons, they did not carry on with the idea of the flumph having a hard shelled top. Maybe descriptive wise, but it doesn't have like a different AC. And its AC is just a very measly 12, which I think plate mail in D&D 5 is AC 18. So
plus 8, effectively.
So plus 8. Yeah, I mean, that's a good way of thinking about it. Basically, in old editions, you could think of the hard top of the flumph as being as hard as plate mail. And they know this because when they sleep, they would sleep like in branches of trees. So they would protect their underside and just leave the shell exposed.
Yeah, so proper armor. Nice.
Yeah, proper armor. It was a real defensive mechanism. But we delved a little deep there. What do you have? We'll let you lead the questions here, Stalker. You have questions, I'm sure, about the flumph.
So I know very little about whether or not how intelligent they are. Do they have language? What do they eat? I've heard a variety of things of what they potentially eat, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. Do they have a society?
This is okay. So this is going to get into, I think, the structure of tonight's conversation is going to be an interesting one, because one thing when we came into this, The Flumph, I definitely expected us to have a conversation about farts. I definitely expected that. I did not expect that in studying this thing, I would learn so much about Dungeons and Dragons history, because a lot of the development of the Flumph is tied to key moments in the history of Dungeons and Dragons. And your question about how its society is structured kind of ties into this. What do you guys think? Should we delve into the history first?
I think
the history is definitely fine with me. Then we can roll into the ecology of it a little bit.
So this was totally my bag. I went all out on the history of this thing. But all
right, we'll
buckle in, but feel free also to jump in, guys, and cut me off or add your own things, ask questions, whatever. I don't intend this to be the hour lecture about the Flumph history, but you do have to talk about how it's tied in the D&D history. You actually have to go back to where the Flumph comes from, which is a magazine called White Dwarf. And White Dwarf was a British magazine begun by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone, who would later become famous for starting Games Workshop, which you may know as the creators of Warhammer 40K. They also created the Fighting Fantasy books. But back in 1977, they just had a little magazine that was originally called The Owl and the Weasel. And they changed its name to White Dwarf. And it was pretty much the only British magazine covering tabletop role-playing games. And there was a deal that TSR, the creators and publishers of Dungeons and Dragons, were going to actually merge with Games Workshop and make it their UK branch. And to kind of seal the deal, they gave them the rights to publish a Monster Manual. And the way White Dwarf decided to go around doing this was they had a feature in their magazine called The Fiendish Factory. And they asked that readers submit monsters of their own creation, and they would publish them for use as supplements. And they were basically going to collect the best ones and release them in a thing called the Fiend Folio. The Fiend Folio was actually done in 1979. It was finished and ready for completion. But at that moment, Game Workshop did not end up merging with TSR. I don't know if this was because TSR canceled the deal or if Games Workshop realized it wasn't going to be lucrative enough. But regardless, because of this, Games Workshop sabotaged the project and basically delayed its release until finally TSR took over the rights of it. And in 1981, they opened their own branch, their own UK division, and the Fiend Folio was the flagship product. And in the Fiend Folio, one of the creatures was the Flumph.
And these were submissions, right? Like this was a monster submitted to White Dwarf by
yes.
people in the community, right?
And they're very British. I mean that in the best of ways, but there were some monsters that they actually didn't use in the Fiend Folio because they were taken from Doctor Who. And they were afraid of copyright. So you had the Rin, which were these somebody picked an episode of Doctor Who about these worms that lay eggs inside of you, and they turned it into a creature in the Fiendish Factory. So yeah, there were all sorts of fan submissions. So, and some of the actually greatest creatures of D&D have come from this, because alongside the fan creations, they expanded some creatures that already existed, like the Drow get their first real description in the Fiend Folio. So does Lolth. Lolth actually gets statted out in the Fiend Folio. And there's creatures that you guys will recognize from D&D as very consistent creatures in the lore, like Aarakocra, those flying bird creatures. There's the Bullywugs. The Githyanki, this was huge. The Githyanki and the Githzerai both originated in the Fiend Folio.
Wow, that's a lot of creatures that are now a part of the D&D Monster Manual.
Yeah. The Flumph, though, wasn't really for a long time. It was largely ignored, and the main reason that it was considered a joke character is because of all the creatures in the Fiend Folio, it's the only one that's lawful good. And that's important at this time because lawful good characters up to now, they were, I mean, the majority of creatures in your monster manuals are evil, right? Or at least neutral. They just eat things because they're beasts. And the only thing fighting them are player characters. And then the rare lawful good monster, which would be like an angel or a, certain kinds of dragons. And then alongside those creatures, those protectors of good, comes the Flumph, the little lawful good fart bag who comes flumphing along, flump, and he's going to save the universe from the devils and the demons and the Gezetheri. And
yeah, I did see that they're actually like intelligent creatures, which I thought was interesting because I had based on what they look like, you would not assume so.
Yeah, they're very intelligent creatures. 14 base intelligence as well as wisdom. Yeah,
that's better than some of my characters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It hurts.
So the Flumph gets largely ignored. It basically becomes this joke character. Everybody thinks that it's a joke because it moves around by farting. It sprays this stinky gas on people, this stinky liquid, and that's like its main form of attack. And then it kind of drops on you like a funny hat. And it doesn't do a lot of damage. It's decently easy to hit. And the biggest insult of all is you can flip these things on their back, and then they're helpless.
Yeah, like turtles, but worse.
Oh, geez. Okay. So there's their weakness.
So they can just, are they stuck if they're upside down like that?
In the early editions, yeah.
Wow.
Kayvon, what does it say? It says, I think it literally says they're helpless, right? Like it doesn't
they're
even.
Helpless. Yeah, they have no save. In the early editions, you flip it over and you can do whatever you want with it, basically. They originally were given a an anti-gravity ability to move. So rather than figuring out how is it that they hover, they just had magic effectively, and that magic was directional. So if you flip them over, they were no longer able to access their ability to either their frumphy expelling of air, farting, whatever. They couldn't do that while they're not hovering, and they can't hover upside down. So they just become sort of floppy, trapped things, which can use their tentacles to sort of grab onto objects and pull themselves up, but shy of that, which is up to the DM's discretion, they're effectively helpless.
Should we call it flumphing?
Flumphing?
If it's human, you're farting, but if
Flumphing.
if it's a squid or something, you're flumphing.
Yeah, that's proper.
Yeah, that's good.
That
Okay, that's
makes
proper.
sense, yeah.
I like it. Yeah, that's good. That's very.
I'm glad we've established this.
So the Flumph, it appears in 1981, right? 14 years go by before it really gets mentioned again. 14 years. So over a decade goes by and this creature gets ignored. And then in 1995, it suddenly reappears in the second edition at kind of the tail end of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition. You get this sudden reappearance of the Flumph, and it's actually given a fairly decent description. It's you learn about that there's multiple kinds of Flumps, and they have society to answer Stalker's question. This is the first discussion of society. And at this point, society is really centered around the Monastic Flumph, which I have pictured here. It's
okay.
Yep. Yeah. It's the Monastic Flumph. Do you want to talk about that, Kayvon?
Yeah, so we skipped this earlier, but these creatures, just so we have a little bit of a sense of scale, are around 2 feet wide, diameter of this circular floating disc, effectively. And they hover. They can go up to 10 feet high, but they tend to hover low on the ground, just so we have sort of a better idea of what we're dealing with. The Monastic Flumph is so they have the ability to cast spells. They're effectively Flumph wizards. They organize themselves in cloisters, and they they're effectively the flumph that you see every day, kind of like the everyday common flumph, is a aberrant albino sort of like genetic freak, where they spore off their bodies little tiny babies, and the vast majority of those babies are sort of like stunted and become the common flumph, and then every so often one of their more like in-tuned, magically capable, powerful flumphs are born as well.
And the albino flumphs, and they're called that because they are literally white in color. They only spawn other albino flumphs.
Yeah. So that's why we see more of them. It's just that their ratio of creation is.
And the monastic flumph, I mean, none of these creatures are particularly threatening, but the monastic flumph is definitely a level up from the baby flumph. This is also where you start to get. They start to try to not just have them be lawful good and be like, yep, lawful good, that's their alignment, but they start to try to explain it. And the monastic flump sort of leads the society down a path of peace and protection of other races. And so this is the first time where they're like, okay, the flumph this is where the good comes from.
Yeah, they changed the way that they look a little bit because they're casting spells. And they don't really speak, but they depending on when in the story they do speak, but effectively they don't really speak. They use their tentacles to cast spells rather than speaking out the words. So they give the monastic flumph more tentacles, and in doing so, trade out the amount of barbed spikes that the early flumph had. So it's a much more like maybe more intimidating, more tentacled creature, but it's not quite as
well. I think they removed the spikes because the spikes were actually pretty. They were the most nightmarish property of the flumph, because the idea was the way a flumph attacked was it would drop down from above. You would be impaled on these spikes that were underneath its soft belly. Those spikes were filled with acid, and they would inject acid under your skin into your organs, which would then melt. And then it would suck up your juices through the spikes.
So it was a really wicked snake bite.
Or like a spider, because it liquefies you and then it sucks up the liquid. So.
Well, but I mean, as far as like the injection aspect of it goes,
yeah.
I don't know. I always think snake more than spider when it comes to that.
They were described as kind of mandibles, almost like.
How is that lawful good though?
Because they only do it to rodents and evil creatures and stuff.
No,
they're not running around landing on people in general unless you attack them.
But this is the point, right, Stalker? It's that's pretty nightmarish. And how do you associate that with like a good creature? And that's why the monastic flumph, one of the reasons they kind of cut down on that aspect of them, is to make them a little bit more like, well, their whole bodies are built for peace, not just for.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So.
Then we jump forward again. So another 3 years goes by and the flumph really doesn't get mentioned. And the next time it comes up, it's very specifically as a joke character. In April, for April Fools of 1998, they released the article, The Ecology of the Flumph. And it's teased with literally the headline of, yeah, we actually did this. So they know.
Totally tongue in cheek, not serious at all. Yeah.
And the article's great. Did any of you read the article?
Yeah.
It's funny. It's actually a really funny scenario. Do you want to describe it?
Just so people know, this is Dragon Magazine 246. So if they want to look it up and read it themselves, they can.
And it's worth it. It's fun.
Yeah, it's a fun article. Effectively, it tells the story like most of these Dragon Magazine's ecologies, where a wizard barges into a meeting hall of like monster hunters and is carrying with him a creature which reeks and is absolutely disgusting smelling. And it turns out that it's a frump and a flump. And they go and like build a committee and investigate the creature and try to figure out what it does and what they can use it for. And one of the person, it's like this, it goes deep into this dive of like their conversations and then pulling up their wizard tomes and all the different things they're looking at it, tapping its shell and figuring out like, oh, we can make this into a buckler, and oh, we might be able to do a levitation potion out of the bile. And as they're messing around with it, they end up slipping and dropping the creature and then having to chase it around their laboratory.
It's
and in
very
the process,
it's very Street Three Stooges.
It's pretty good. Yeah, it's definitely slapstick.
Awesome.
And then in the process, which something which they sort of reveal in this, but is also mentioned earlier, is that the smell that they excrete when they kind of skunk spray you, they don't have a very good sense of smell, these creatures overall, but they have a very sharp sense of smell for their own alarm
Their
scent.
own musk.
Their own musk. So it releases their skunk. It releases its skunk spray, and then as they're chasing it around, several monastic flumphs enter the laboratory and effectively rescue it. It's quite the scene.
It's an amazing scene when the monastics show up and like the wizards are terrified because the monastics just sort of glare at them in this and they like, one of them was like using the flumph, like was talking about using the flumph as a hat, and the monastic just says like, it is not a hat, and it's just like this really ridiculous scene. So it's definitely meant to be jokey. But like the Ecology articles do, they start to share like incredible details about how these things move, how the air actually moves through it, that what parts of its body can be used for what potions, like Kayvon said, and so it's
Can you eat it?
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. But again, it kind of goes away after this, and the next, I think, official appearance is 7 years later, and it's a 2005 adventure called the Box of Flumph, which is again a silly adventure where you rescue a flumph and then it asks you to rescue its family. Now we're in 3rd edition, and it's worth noting this is the only mention of the flumph in the entire 3rd edition. Is a throwaway adventure in Dragon Magazine. I don't remember, or Dungeon Magazine. I don't remember which one.
118.
118. Thank you. And it stats it out, but that's it. It never shows up in a Monster Manual, another Fiend Folio, anything. And then 4th edition is the same way. It shows up once in a throwaway adventure, again as an April Fool's joke. I can't remember the name of the adventure. It's like it's a dungeon delve, like, and it incorporates a lot of the silly characters from the Fiend Folio. Like I think the flail snail is there, which is, we got to do the flail snail someday. And this is where stuff gets interesting, and where Kayvon and I actually had, should we call it a nerd argument earlier?
Was that why my texts were exploding?
Yeah, that's the reason why. It's
home?
not a nerd argument. It's just a conversation, which this is a conversation we should be having about what exactly is canon and what is homebrew and just fanfic. Which, you know, full respect to fan fiction. Most of the mythologies is built up through fan fiction, but I think that it's important to just make sure that we're citing our sources.
Well, you know, and canon in D&D is a strange thing. Like at some point tonight, we'll probably share with you all what happens when a flumph crossbreeds with a giant space hamster, and. You know, these things, all of this.
What?
Yep.
Okay.
That is the response you should be having.
I'm going to feel that that's not canon.
Why?
Well, and this is the question. I mean, it's published in Dragon Magazine and Wizards of the Coast.
Space hamster, though?
Oh, no. Giant space hamsters are canon. That is a creature from Spelljammer. They are.
Okay. Well, that's something we're going to have to tackle. Continue.
Well, very, very famously, the most famous giant space hamster is Boo, the miniature giant space hamster from Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate, the video games. Manx Kaz Boo, the miniature giant space hamster, which at some point in Baldur's Gate 2 is confirmed to be a real miniature giant space hamster. But anyways, that's
canon.
That's canon. And Wizards of the Coast has been pretty clear that, like, basically there's many multiverses, and all things that they've ever published are canon. Now, what's interesting about the Flumph is that it wasn't copyrighted by Wizards of the Coast. They never copyrighted it. It's a free to use character. Anybody can develop the Flumph. And in 2010, Paizo, the creators of Pathfinder, decide to do that. They have a product called, I want to say it's the Misfits. I'll have to look and see what the exact title is. But it is a module where they basically cover a number of creatures that they consider, underused monsters, misfit monsters redeemed. That's what it's called, Misfits Monsters Redeemed. So Paizo releases Misfit Monsters Redeemed, and it takes a number of creatures that have previously been sort of weak creatures or underused or laughed at, and a freelance writer comes in and develops a full history and society and ecology for these creatures. And writer Adam Deagle, writer Adam Deagle comes in and does the Flumph. And the reason I bring this up is whether canon or not, it was Paizo that really revived the Flumph and actually made it a favorite character amongst a lot of D&D gamers because they took it very seriously and they developed it into quite the interesting social creature in that they made it basically a space traveling paladin whose one role in life was to stop like the arrival of things like Cthulhu on various planets. And they basically use psychic energy to sense these beings, and then recognizing that they were incredibly weak themselves, would travel to planets where they could enlist adventurers to go fight these things for them. So it did a few things. One, it gave them a purpose. And two, it gave DMs a way to actually use them in their campaigns. Very clearly said, these are quest givers. So suddenly the Flumph could show up not just as a joke monster, but as an actual integral part of a campaign. This weird otherworldly creature that farts to move around and then also spews like
flumphs
to get around, and then spews, knowledge, lore about the elder gods.
Did they have them talking in Pathfinder? Because I know that later, like I believe 5th edition, they effectively remove the Flumph's ability to speak other than through telepathic communication.
I'll have to look at that. I'll check that out. I can't remember.
Okay, well, not a big deal.
Yeah, I actually don't recall. I want to say they do speak, but I'll just check their stat block real quick and see if they can speak. It'll say it.
Yeah, what Pathfinder did, even though it's debatable on canon, is super interesting. Effectively giving them purpose, in the world, and giving them the culture effectively of like we're space traveling beings who want to warn intelligent sentient creatures of impending doom, which it's pretty cool.
Stalker, do you have? We have gone on. I mean, this is we really launched into this. I did give fair warning, but I want to give you a chance to speak up here.
So I've noticed that the Flumph seems to float in and out of D&D, and it's now becoming more permanent. Is there a reason? Do you think like has it become more popular? People have like found it kind of endearing. This kind of almost contradiction to what is typical in D&D, or do you think it's something else, or is it because it's something that you can literally do anything with because it's not copyrighted?
I think that it's because of Pathfinder. Pathfinder you got to remember, and this is what's so interesting about the history of the Flumph and how it worked alongside D&D. Pathfinder and and Wizards of the Coast. Pathfinder and Wizards of the Coast were in a real war with each other. I mean, Wizards of the Coast made the very awesome creative decision to release its system, the D20 system, as a free of copyright system. Like anyone could use it and develop their own D20 system. Paizo took that to the next level. And what they created in Pathfinder was sort of like 3.5 advanced. It was Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 advanced, and people went crazy for it. For its lifetime and all through 4th edition, Pathfinder way outsold Dungeons and Dragons. It was incredibly popular. And that's just numbers. Like as far as people playing it, a lot of it was free online. You get the full rule book online. So the number of players was huge.
Yeah, that takes out the barrier to entry for some people.
And 5th edition was if you read the design notes, it was in many ways a response to Pathfinder, not 4th edition of D&D. It was Pathfinder. They were trying to fill the gap. They didn't want to compete with Pathfinder anymore because it was too big. They wanted to create the alternative to Pathfinder. And so what they made was, whereas Pathfinder was complex and had tons of tables and you could build anything there was a rule for everything, D&D 5 had very few rules that let you do anything. And so everything got simplified. But alongside this design idea was sort of taking back some of the fantasy creatures that Pathfinder had used. And it's interesting. I think it's interesting to note that the Flumph in D&D 5 uses pretty much the entire reasoning of the Flumph that Pathfinder gave it.
Yeah, intergalactic space travel and all that. Yeah,
and do-gooders who want to psionically warn people of, they're still quest givers, all of that. Simplified a little bit for D&D 5, but very much so the recognizable creature that grew up in Pathfinder.
Do we want to jump from there into sort of how 5th edition now, like what is the current Flumph?
Yes, that's a good idea. Because what is the Flumph like?
Yeah, so they correct me if I'm wrong here, Jonathan or anyone else, but I'm under the impression, based on what I've seen, that they've gotten rid of the Flumph's feeding. Like, it's no longer eating rats and hunting prey in this way. Now it's feeding off of like psychic energy. So rather than being like a physical carnivore, it's a emotional psychic carnivore.
It's a psychic vampire now.
Yeah, it's a psychic vampire, effectively. So, like, they have a passive absorption where they can just, like, read your surface thoughts, and that's, like, what gives it nutrients, effectively. So, like, the more that you're around them, the more they know about you, and that could be cool for role-playing. And then also they gave them, like, a telepathic shroud, I think is what they call it. Like, it prevents them from being divined or emotionally read, so that they have sort of like a barrier surrounding them so that you can't mind flay them.
You're absolutely right. The Flumphs are now described as psychic feeders. And so they hover around these societies like Mind Flayers and Githyanki or Githyanki, and they feed off the psychic energies put out by them. And that also places them, again, as a DM tool. It gives them a reason to be hanging out around powerful adversaries. So this is shown in the most recently released Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which describes the 20 levels of Undermountain. And in that, remember, a Flumph is a CR 1/8 creature. It is
not. Yeah, they're not terribly tanky.
It is not a CR1. It is a CR 1/8. They have 7 hit points and
oh my gosh,
and AC 12. Yet, and they're vulnerable. They have a vulnerability. Psychic damage does double damage on them. So this is kind of a crazy easy to kill creature. They show up in level 17 of the level 17 of the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. So that's a pretty deep level. But the reason that they show up there is there's a bunch of Mind Flayers and Githyanki. So it's a way to give DMs a way to use these really, 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 really low level creatures.
So
in their highest level.
Do they have a society in 5e? Because obviously the older editions have the monarchy-esque style of societies where you have the king or queen Flumph. Do they even have genders? Like, or sexes? Like, or is it just
no? They are
monogendered kind of species.
They're described a little bit like their gender is described a little bit like plants. They basically seed pod. And my favorite description of maybe any creature's mating ritual is the Flumph. It's from the Pathfinder description. They left it out of D&D 5, but it's incredible. basically the Flumphs, they get together like as a cloister and they sort of share genetic code and they have like, they sort of grow these pods in themselves. And then comes the discussion where they decide who is going to spread the seed.
Oh gosh.
And the one...
At least they have a conversation about it.
The one that is chosen is known as the Honored One. And the Honored One, basically, all the Flumphs start flumphing madly.
They're all flumping madly.
They flumph madly, and they flumph the Honored One, carrying him on a wave of flumph into the sky where he's holding the seed pod, and they flumph higher, and they flumph higher until they cannot flumph anymore, and they slowly fall away, giving their words of encouragement to the Honored One as he rises even higher than them. He or she rises into the atmosphere. His tentacles freezing over with the lower atmosphere and the intense cold, but he still flumps higher. And then at the very apex of his flumph, he spins, and he spins madly, and the biggest wind-up in history, and then he flings his seeds into space.
Into space.
Oh
This
my
is-
God.
And then utterly exhausted, he crashes back down to Earth and often dies. It's amazing. It's my favorite description of amazing.
It totally pays to be the chosen.
No, once
right?
once they land.
All right,
Yeah,
who
it's great,
wrote
right?
this?
And once they land, they because they're asexual, it just that one little pod that lands on the planet, if you're lucky, millions of years later, can self-replicate and then forms the society as we know it of Flumph on in the Forgotten Realms.
Well, it explains how there's so many of them, despite how weak there are, because something that is that easy to squish,
You produce a lot of babies.
They'd be wiped
Yeah.
out. They have to in order to.
So this
survive at
works.
all.
Like I was earlier complaining, Jonathan, about this being uncanon, but since this only really describes the process of like the home planet and how the home planet operates, it totally fits in fine as a background explanation as to where the Flumph came from.
If D&D 5 had contradicted it, if it had released in 5th edition its own thing that said Flumps, they psychically create more Flumps, or
they're made by a wizard in some special year or something.
Right. Then I would totally bow to the most recent edition, at least the Fey run edition of the Flump as being that. But since they leave it open, I think they really worked from that. I think
and they even adopted some of it. So it's not only leaving it open, it's they picked and chose the pieces that fit the narrative they were telling, and which by doing so effectively opens you up to believe and take as truth the rest of the narrative that they decided not to include.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I take it as canon. And really, whether it's canon or not, I think, again, in the history of the development, it shows how Pathfinder, a game basically created by Dungeons and Dragons, later influenced Dungeons and Dragons. And it's so cool to me that Pathfinder chose to take this, what was considered a total joke character by Wizards of the Coast and TSR. I mean, again, only shows up in like April releases, right? It's the April Fool's creature. 4th edition gives it like a single line. It's just like, this pathetic creature attacks you. And then it gives some stats. And I think they call them the head stabber Flumph, which is kind of incredible. But again, nobody's really doing anything with this until Pathfinder comes along, and Pathfinder releases. I mean, we have to give huge credit to Deagle for writing this article and developing. I mean, and it's an article. It's like 5 or 6 or 7 pages of description of details on how the Flumph lives, its society, how they communicate, what their goals are, what they enjoy, the treasure they cherish. I mean, it goes deep. So, it's cool that they took this creature, a fan-made creature, was given a fan-made history, and then finally adopted for the first time ever in a Monster Manual in 5th edition. It's come home, guys. The flump.
Full
the flump
circle.
is
Full
come
circle, yeah. But okay, that just leads into I think one of the most important questions. What does it taste like, and can you eat it?
Oh, geez. I wish Tyler was here.
I know. Tyler tends to go into detail on this. That you can eat it. It tastes gross. And was it goblins and ogres and other such abhorrent monsters will occasionally eat them. It
is actually given a description that, again, as one of the reasons it doesn't get eaten that much, or it doesn't die that much, is that it is completely horrid to eat. The taste is putrescent.
As Mamba says, it tastes like ass.
Yeah, it tastes like Asperger. So that is why the Flump survives to this day.
So how many flumps are in a like society, like cult, like community of flumps? Like, and what is a group of flumps called?
A cloister.
A cloister of flumps.
It is.
A cloister of Flump.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like this varied depending on the source, but it was something like 6. Like a large cloister would be 6 pairs, so 12.
There is, if you go back to the early, the second edition one, where it actually shows what I'm trying to pull it up. They actually give like the stats on how many appear in a group.
Nomadic Hunter, doop.
I want to say, and it's the Monstrous Compendium Annual Volume 2. That's a name that rolls off the tongue. But the flump in that is given how many show up in a group. And I want to say it's actually, it's like it's a few dozen. So there's a lot of these creatures, Stalker. And I will say in the games they show up in, like in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, they come in decent groups, decent sizes. Though they also have a tendency to sort of float around aimlessly. So you might encounter like 2 just hanging out somewhere.
So are these supposed to be fairly common or fairly rare? Because it seems like they'd be fairly common, but most campaigns I've ever played in, it seems like they're not very common.
Do you play many campaigns in the Underdark? If you play around in the Underdark, you'll probably come across them. Shy of that, you're not really going to see them.
So they're more common in the Underdark.
Not really surface side then, yeah.
I believe they show up. I mean, again, keep in mind that they never showed up in many official adventures. There was like a Castle Greyhawk adventure early on where they showed up in, I think it was called the Room of Silly and Unused Monsters. So.
Oh, I read that. It's like an in-between room to get to the next room, essentially.
Yeah, the room is literally called the room to get to the next room. Yeah. So these are joke monsters originally. D&D 5, you finally start getting the Flumphin adventures. Like I'm pretty sure they show up in the adventure Out of the Abyss, which is an Underdark adventure, as Kayvon mentioned. They're prevalent in the Underdark, and they definitely show up in Dungeons of the Mad Mage, which is again another dungeon adventure. So the sense I get is that it's one of those things where people are like, "Oh yeah, the Flump. I've heard of the Flump." I don't know how many people have actually encountered them, but everybody knows what they are. You know what? It's like things that come from Australia. That's what it's like.
Everyone's kind of heard of them.
So it will kill me.
You're like, oh, the wallaby. Yeah, that thing. The wallaby exists.
Actually, this actually leads into a good question that Mamba asked. Is there an evil version or a counterpart of the Flump?
Oh, heck yes.
Is there? Oh, I'm excited to hear this.
Oh, yeah. This is actually interesting. And this comes from fairly early on. I can't remember exactly what edition, but you read about that the Flumps can be corrupted. They can be corrupted by spending too much time around evil things. And and in D&D 5, it's way more explicit about it. It says, I'll read it here. Consuming psionic energy reveals the thoughts and emotions of the creatures on which the Flumps feed. Since so many of these creatures are evil, Flumps are often subjected to thoughts, emotions, and hungers that sicken their pure nature. When Flumps encounter good-hearted adventurers, they eagerly share the dark secrets they have learned in the hopes of casting down their evil sources of energy. So basically, it's hinted here that if a flump spends too long sucking down that evil juice, they can turn evil themselves. And one of my favorite comments I read about the flumps on a fan site was this DM had actually created a flump paladin blackguard. So he was a fallen paladin flump who would chase the party around and try to murder them.
That's amazing. Did they just let him chase them around? Like, why?
Yeah, what's the Flump's move speed?
Why would they just take it down?
So apparently he held a very powerful magic sword. So despite the Flump being like incredibly easy to kill, he wore like dark plate mail and had this great sword.
It has 7 HP. How?
They couldn't get past the armor, and before they could touch it, it would like mess them up with this sword.
Wait, but how fast is this thing? Like,
they would just run away.
It flies as fast as you walk. I think it's a 30-foot.
Oh wow, that's
fly.
That's surprisingly fast for something that looks like it would barely float.
Its flumps are powerful.
You can still turn it on its back. Although in 5th edition they have the best response to this, which is they can actually every round save and try to flip themselves back over.
Yeah.
Whereas before they just kind of hung out there.
Oh, speaking of fighting them, something we neglected to mention earlier is that they have no eyelids, so you can't really sneak up on them even when they're sleeping. They have their little tendril snail eyes are always open, watching the environment,
which also makes them susceptible in extra rules to light attacks.
Exactly.
Right, light attacks and blinding.
Yeah. 5th edition did away with a lot of that stuff, but I would not be opposed, if a GM at my table said, yeah, you can blind this, and also it's you can't sneak up on it. Yeah. I have a picture up of Darth Flumpher, which is it was another Flump taken from a fan game, where
it's very mechanical and a Gatling gun.
Yeah, it looks like it's holding a minigun. Yeah,
he's holding a minigun. And apparently, this creature was described to me as one which would come from the shadows using a Darth Vader voice, and would then proceed to rain gunfire completely ineffectively down on the party members because it couldn't see because the eye stalks were actually under its hat.
Is this Pathfinder? If you're having guns, or did they finally introduce guns into D&D?
I don't know what edition it was. So I can't answer that. But yeah, they do have guns in D&D though.
There's a gun class now, isn't there? Like a gunslinger.
There's a gunslinger drow. And there are guns in the DM's manual to give some example guns, and
it's very limited though. They're very flintlock, very slow to reload.
Well, no, it's got laser guns and
in D&D.
Oh yeah. The DM's guide has stats for all that stuff. The drow guns are more limited. They're more like flintlock magic pistols.
That's a conversation for a later day. But I think there's definitely something charming about a world where there are no guns, and you have to maintain a bow and arrow and sword combat to go out there and do some damage.
Well, and guns sort of, I talk about this a little bit. No, I won't get too off topic here, but I talk about this a little bit in one of the Adventurous Appetizer episodes about dealing damage to players, and guns sort of break the fantasy. Like, for some reason, we can picture people getting hit, maybe because of video games, I don't know, but we can picture people getting like hit by swords and just being like, ugh, and getting up. But like, when you shoot something in the head, it's just a little harder for us to be like, and then he bounces back. Like, it's harder it's easier for our brains to translate broadsword hit into die 8 plus 2 damage than it is like shotgun to the face into 2 die 8 damage. It's just harder.
Shake it off. It's fine.
Yeah. Stalker or Morgan, any other questions about the Flumph?
Oh, well, I did see something when I was doing a quick browse on Flumps that they would change color according to emotions. Is that a current iteration or a past? version of a Flump.
You want to take this one, Jonathan? I believe it's a current iteration where they shift their color based on their emotional state.
A Flumph glows faintly, reflecting its moods and its color. Soft pink means it's amused. Deep blue is sadness. Green expresses curiosity. And crimson is anger.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I don't know if that came from Pathfinder. I'd have to reread the article, or if that was a 5 edition. But again, it's giving this creature much more character.
Right.
I do like the psionic bent that they took in 5th edition, and some of that was present in Pathfinder, but they really went there in 5th edition. They just made it a pure psionic creature, which is cool because I think it also explains the Flumph a little bit. Like it takes this weird creature and it's like, oh, but it's psionic, and then you're kind of okay with it.
Someone asked in the comments, are there any uses for Flump parts in spells or potions? And I know you touched on it earlier with that story of them exploring the Flump with the wizards, and then the Flump comes and rescues.
Yeah. Dragon Magazine 246. They list actually a couple in that. I'm trying to see if I can scroll through because I don't actually remember offhand what they were.
One Flumph brain equals 3 potions of levitation. And you can use the tentacles, you can cut those open, and I think it takes like a full body of tentacles to make an oil of acid resistance, because the tentacles have acid in them. And then you can, of course, take out its guts, its innards, and its gas sacs to create stinking cloud spells.
Oh, but if you use the stinking cloud spell, it does the same sort of attraction of the other flumps.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So you have to be careful.
Yeah, the flumps will show
They're
up.
gonna be real happy with you.
Yeah, and apparently they can get pretty vengeful. They can actually get pretty, like, these are not just like, oh, I'm peace loving, whatever, dude. You cut up my buddy there. Like they're totally.
You're an
vengeful.
evil creature at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, they can get pretty upset with you, and even though they're low level creatures, they're
enough low level creatures can take down a higher level party. We have learned.
Yeah,
this.
we've all been there with a bunch
Johnny.
of commoners get upset, man. Just like 1 hit point at a time. Those things will knock you down
man.
quick.
Yep.
Ugh.
I mean,
commoners.
even if the DM is not just saying like, yeah, you're overwhelmed. I mean, they have a stench spray, which is actually pretty nasty if you get hit in it. It's like because you don't have a once you failed the save against it, you're coated, and this stuff gives you a disadvantage on your attack rolls and saves for like the entire time that you're covered.
The stench does? Oh, I don't know if I've read into the current iteration. I thought it just made your friends would be repulsed by you and want to flee.
No, that's an older version. They keep changing what it does. I think it's in 4th edition, everybody around you like takes penalties to their attack. But in 5th edition, you exude this horrendous smell, and you're poisoned as long as you're covered in it. And then anyone within 5 feet of you is poisoned while they stay close to you.
Oh, that's pretty
man.
tough. Yeah.
And the only way to remove it is by using a short rest to bathe in water, alcohol, or vinegar.
So prestidigitation would not work then.
No, and in fact, the earlier edition, I think it's the Ecology, clarifies that it has to be like 6 to 8 gallons of water.
Yeah. It's not an easy task. It has to be under serious running water. Yeah.
Well, don't get attacked by a Flump in the middle of the desert.
Yeah,
then.
that's intense. Could you sand scrape it off of you?
I would say no, buddy.
With a little water, maybe.
Yeah, maybe 6 gallons of sand.
4 to 6 to 8 gallons with a little sand. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Just abrade all of the couple layers of skin off. It'll be.
Hey, that's all I'm saying. Just use the sand and scrape your layers of skin off.
Yeah, Stalker, you mentioned something earlier which we skipped over, which was you were asking us about the culture and whether or not they have like kings and queens and that sort of thing. And we talked briefly about it, but we didn't go into detail, which is really that they, as a lawful, and this might have changed, correct me if I'm wrong, but as like a lawful good organization, everyone just works for the greater good in the community. So you don't actually have leaders. You have cooperatives effectively between the members, and because they are such strongly lawful good, they always will look out for the best interests of the whole rather than any individual, which is how they're able to maintain sort of cooperative societal structure.
Although it's worth pointing out that they do follow the lead of the monastic Flumph.
Oh yeah, the flumphs. I'm speaking of flumph colonies or cloisters, not of the relationship between, or the monastic cloisters, not the relationship between the monastics and the commons. The commons are less intelligent, definitely a follower class or a lesser class. But amongst the monastics, that is effectively the hierarchy.
And it does feel like in 5th edition they basically made them all monastic. Like that, it feels like the creature they describe in 5th edition is not a common Flumph, but even the color changing and all that kind of feels like they either rolled the two together, or which is possible in lore because genetically they can mix and match and create new versions.
I have one last question, and then I think I have answered all of the questions that I had. Are they able to carry the weight of another person with that, like a character?
Can you ride a
exactly?
Not. They have a strength of 6, so I would assume that applies to carrying weight as far as lifting themselves up. Though early on it is like an anti-gravity magical. They say that they're not levitating through any sort of physical means. It's not the flumphing that levitates them. The flumph is how they move around. They're flumphs. So because it's sort of a magical levitation, I don't know. Talk to your DM.
Right.
As a DM, I would not allow it.
Denied, Stalker. We've been
I'm not saying. Here's the thing. I'm not thinking. Oh, I can ride this as like a horse. I'm thinking like, oh, I'm in a dangerous situation with a Flumph. Can he save me?
So here's how that would play out in my game. I'm just gonna throw it out there. In my game, the Flumph would be very interested in helping you. He would be really excited by your idea. He would turn yellow with excitement or whatever color it was. But he would try to teach you the magic of flumphing. And the next 10 minutes of game would be taken up with your character trying to fart so hard that he could propel himself across the room.
The Flumph knows better. It has a set 14 plus intelligence.
It is intelligent. It's not just mildly intelligent.
It's a very intelligent creature.
It's gonna go tie a rope and be like, good luck.
It's smarter than most of our player characters.
Well, and that might be exactly its point, that it knows it's smarter than you, and it's going to.
Wait, does that mean that they have a really twisted sense of humor deep down?
Oh, imagine the psionic meal it could have after that. Yeah. So, Stalker, any other Flumph questions? We kind of just took it. We took it from you.
I mean,
right.
You answered literally everything that I could think of. I did not realize they had such a depth of history, and that it was like player created fanfic creation. That's amazing.
It is really unique. And I am going to use the word unique. I don't like to use that literally because then you find out you're wrong. But I'm going to say that it is unique amongst the monsters in the Monster Manual of D&D 5 in that it is truly player driven. There was not a lot of support given to this creature for its entire lifespan. And everything that was done with Flumps came about because of some fan. I don't think any other creatures like that.
Speaking of fan fiction, there's a nice little bit of flavor text that I'd love to share with you guys, which I found. I believe it's from a D&D Behind the Screen Reddit article. But, quote, when in danger, they prefer to hide and disguise themselves as glowing mushrooms commonly found in their environment. A Flumph will sit their tentacles on the ground, bunching them together to appear as a stalk of a mushroom, and then retract the eyes and close their mouth and use that as effectively their hiding technique. So that's kind of cute. I don't know, like walking through a cavern and all of a sudden the mushrooms that you think are mushrooms start rising up and becoming Flumphs. That'd be quite the experience.
Okay, Vaughn, that's a nice little bit of Flumph text. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nice little bit of Flumph there.
Yeah. It's Flumph compared to all the other depth of their history, but I love it.
It would also explain how they're able to hide and listen to mind flayers and draw the psychic energy of those around them. Is that they're just pretending to be mushrooms on the wall while they passively absorb all there is to know.
It did say that for some reason the mind flayers didn't didn't care about them at all.
Yeah.
Like, they just straight up don't care. They just ignore them, and I didn't quite understand why that was.
You know, all I can picture is when K-Pop's describing this is that scene from Fantasia with all, all the
all the dancing mushrooms, the horribly racist dancing mushrooms.
I'm next. I gotta go watch that movie, and I'm just gonna pretend they're all flumps.
Oh no!
There
you
that's
go.
so good.
We broke our DM, guys.
You did ask
Who
about the
knows?
mind flayers, which is really interesting.
I did.
And
Because I did read that they tend to hide or like hang out around groups of mind flayers, which I thought was really interesting.
Well, aren't they psychically protected, like you said earlier?
Yeah, they have a shroud, so you can't actually. That's probably part of what they're protected by. Is the mind flayer may not even be able to see them. How does that work? Have you looked into that? The telepathic shroud.
Quick. The Flump's shroud it's just immune to any effect that would sense its emotions or read its thoughts, and all divination spells. So they are pretty difficult to detect. The other thing is you have to understand mind flayer culture, that's another episode, but mind flayer culture is they are driven by the search for brains. And flumps have small brains. I mean, I know that they're intelligent, but they don't have their brains are not good. They don't make good meals or good hosts for new mind flayers. Mind flayers seek out powerful creatures because it's not about how intelligent the creature is; it's how powerful they are. Yeah.
Okay.
Githyanki, on the other hand, hate them. They consider them like pests, flies in their house, and they will kill them.
Speaking of random stuff, do you remember, I think it was in the Dragon Magazine 246 article where they talked about the evolution or like where they might have the common ancestor. Like this is we're talking about contrary origin stories, like what you believe is canon, et cetera, et cetera. I believe they went into detail about do you remember that exactly, or it was like something like Grells or something? Yeah, found it. So they mentioned that in the same article, the Dragon Magazine 246, they talk about Grells being similar to Flumphs, but that they believe that a common ancestor might be the Labra, or also known as the Tangler.
I'm going to put up a picture of a Grell, and you guys will see.
Yeah, which is a simpler form of sort of floating tentacled creature.
Ugh.
So again, creature that we have to get to at another date, but the Grell is like a more disgusting.
It's a brain with the beak of a hawk and tentacles falling underneath it, and little spikes at the end of the tentacles. Literally, it's a floating brain with tentacles and a beak.
Barb tentacles.
Definitely something we're going to have to explore.
Nope, do not want.
I wonder where its stomach is.
Well, we'll have to get into that in a later episode.
Yeah.
Speaking of later episodes, I do believe we have a plan for our next one, correct? Are we going to be doing the gelatinous cube is what I was
Yes,
told?
I believe in 3 weeks, the plan is to cover the gelatinous cube. A very classic D&D monster.
So yeah, if you've enjoyed our little podcast here, we'd really appreciate it if you dropped us a follow. Go visit us on alignmentmayvary.com, where you can find all of our previous podcasts in the Bestiary, as well as adventurous appetizers and our soon upcoming radio play that we're super excited about and is launching in September. Anything else?
I just want to get like one last. I want to let Stalker have the last word here. You know, what?
All right.
Give us a last word on Flump, Stalker.
Fart bags. There'll always be fart bags.
Now I remember why I don't give Stalker the last word.
I had a beautiful ending all wrapped up, John.
I think we should sing ourselves out with a Flump song. You know? All right. It's been
wonderful. Thank you for hanging out, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Tolerating us.